Today's video is sponsored by Magellan TV, an amazing documentary streaming service founded by filmmakers for the love of history. Their mission is to tell the great stories that have defined the human experience. And with more than 3,000 excellent programs available on Magellan, it's hard to stop watching once you start. They've got everything from the Greeks to the Great War, plus modern history, biographies, scientific profiles, true crime, and so much more. And their team adds more content every week. Then what's one thing you love about paid streaming services? There are no ads, just hours and hours of true-to-life, bingeable content. Now, if you're looking for some wholesome holiday content, 'tis the season after all, then Magellan can get you started with titles like The Legend of Santa and In Search of Santa Claus, or you can stick to more traditional historical docu-series, the ancient history genre, particularly good over there. This holiday season, you guys can take advantage of a special holiday deal with Magellan by clicking the link in the description below. Snag a buy one, get one free deal for an annual membership. That way you can give the gift of Magellan and still keep a little something for yourself. It's content for days and days, so let Magellan hook you and a friend up. You'll be glad you did. And now today's video. You were too fast to live, too young to die. This is how the Eagles remember today's protagonist in their 1974 song. In his lifetime, he only starred in 3 films, and only one of them was released while he was still alive. And yet, he became one of the most influential actors and pop culture figures of the 1950s and beyond. On the silver screen, he set the template for the quintessential rebellious youth. In his private life, he craved speed, he sought passion from both girls and boys, and he obsessively courted death. But he also yearned for the love and affection of a regular family, took any occasion to learn everything on anything, to improve himself and to leave his mark on the acting world. This is the story of James Dean and how a Hollywood icon was made. James Byron Dean was born on February the 8th, 1931 in Marion, Indiana, 17 months after the wedding of 19-year-old Mildred Marie Wilson and 22-year-old Winton A. Dean. Winton had been a farmer in Indiana, but after taking a job as a dental technician, he relocated the family to Santa Monica, California. When Jimmy was only 8, Mildred died of cervical cancer. Winton did not know how to cope with being a single father. Winton's mother, Emma, offered some advice. Jimmy could go and live with Winton's sister, Hortense, who ran a Quaker farm in Fairmont, Indiana, with her husband Marcus. Winton Dean agreed. It turned out to be the right choice, as he was drafted into the army 18 months later, and he wasn't cut out to be a single father. Plus, Hortense and Marcus turned out to be excellent parental figures for Jimmy, but as a result, James and Winton Dean never developed a close relationship, and the future actor would constantly seek surrogate parental figures. Jimmy had an idyllic childhood in Fairmont. His uncle and aunt became mum and dad, and he grew attached to his cousin, Joan, as the big sister he'd never had. When Joan got married during the war and rice was hard to come by, Jimmy toured all over the stores in the county until there was enough to throw for the newlyweds. Hortense and Marcus, on their part, did their best to encourage Jimmy's artistic inclinations, as his mother, Mildred, had done before. If you were a lazy casting director for an 80s comedy, you'd take a look at the kid and cast him as the stereotypical school nerd. He was short, awkward, and he wore thick, horn-rimmed glasses and dental braces. And yet, Jimmy excelled in everything except academic subjects. He played violin, brass, horn, and drums. He tap danced and painted. He excelled in both the high school basketball and baseball teams. But his greatest passions were acting and motorcycling. According to his grandma Emma, the realization he should pursue acting came after his appearance in a church play in which Jimmy played a blind boy. Well, I'll tell you, I wish he wasn't quite so good at it. I cried all the way through. Besides family members, Jimmy's greatest influence in his teenage years was his pastor, Reverend James DeWeerd, a decorated World War II veteran and friend of Winston Churchill. The clergyman encouraged the young Dean to pursue his passion for the stage and for the racecourse. DeWeerd also introduced Jimmy to philosophy, classical music, and the notion that he should seek his true self beyond the physical and ethical confines of small-time America. The older James taught the younger James that conformity is cowardice, a concept, ironically, Jimmy put into place by conforming to his mentor's worldview. Like a psychic vampire, Jimmy absorbed every possible teaching from DeWeerd to the point of adopting his convictions and mannerisms. This was to become a recurring pattern in Dean's life. Jimmy would cling on to a surrogate parent or other mentor figure. He would then drain them of all the culture and knowledge they could offer, and then he'd move on to the next provider of mental energy. When the two talked about bullfighting and car racing, the Reverend introduced the ever-present possibility of sudden death in such occupations. But sudden death should not be feared if one believed in personal immortality. Sudden death followed by immortality. The future star's fate had been sealed. In 1949, Jimmy graduated from high school and moved back in with his dad Wynton in Santa Monica, California. He enrolled in the local college where Wynton insisted that he study law. But of course, he dedicated way more time to the performing arts. One of his drama teachers, Mrs. Jean Nielsen Owen, took him under her wing. While his raw talent was undeniable, his poor articulation made him barely understandable. Fellow students blamed this on the Indiana accent, but Nielsen realized the problem was caused by the dental braces. Eventually, she helped fix the enunciation problem by having Dean read Hamlet for a whole term. Dean then transferred to the University of California, Los Angeles, and majored in theater. In his first months at UCLA, James Dean did not make an impression. He was withdrawn, awkward, and did not mingle easily with the theatrical clique. Even his acting chops did not stand out against the average of the students. At that stage, he felt more at home with the jocks and the frat boys as he had joined a Greek fraternity. His attitude changed when he joined the informal classes held by actor James Whitmore, who had studied in New York and imported the more sophisticated East Coast techniques to Hollywood. It was during his classes that he had an epiphany. This was the style for him. A new, direct, and realistic acting style heavily influenced by the system of Russian director Konstantin Stanislavski. This was an approach which required actors to plunge deep into themselves, to retrieve those memories and emotions which could match their character's psychological state. It was at Whitmore's classes that Jimmy finally clicked with the clique of more promising acting students. In particular, he got acquainted with William Bast, who had become one of his best friends and lovers. As Jimmy fell in with the acting crowd, he got estranged from his fraternity friends. One night, one of the frat boys made a snide remark against the thespian community, and Jimmy reacted badly. Very badly. The argument degenerated into a huge fistfight. Dean had to leave the frat house, and he moved in with Bast. The two were so strapped for cash that they lived by candlelight, subsisting on oatmeal mixed with mayonnaise. Bast also learned to cope with Jimmy's frequent and unpredictable periods of depression. During these spells, he fell completely silent, and it was best to avoid him completely. Those downers were followed by periods of intense electric energy, during which Vampire Jimmy was able to learn new skills in a matter of days, clinging to one of his psychic supplies. And in between those extremes, Dean appeared to most as an intense, awkward young man, goofy and endearing one moment, arrogant and dismissive the next. During one of his restless periods, Dean landed his first paying acting jobs. After some TV commercials, he was cast as John the Baptist in an Easter TV special called Hill No. 1. The reviews were quite good, so good in fact that Jimmy got an agent and some minor roles followed, mainly in radio and TV dramas, but he also scored non-speaking roles in Sailor Beware with Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, and Has Anybody Seen My Girl with Rock Hudson. Jimmy was elated to find that he had to speak one line in the war drama Fixed Bayonets, but the scene was edited out. During this brief stint, James got a brief glimpse of Hollywood's glitzy lifestyle. He had started dating young star Beverly Wills, daughter of noted comedian Joan Davis. Through Beverly, James took to hanging out with a crowd of promising actors and artists around Sunset Strip. The milieu initially excited Dean as he was exposed to a whirlwind of contemporary art, literature, and music that he'd never heard of. As usual, he clung to mentor figures like a barnacle and became an instant expert in any new topic of interest. When he could not find a viable human host, Jimmy turned to books. Based on accounts from his close friends, it appears that he had some issues with reading, although never explicitly stated he may have suffered from dyslexia. That is why he preferred to absorb knowledge via conversations rather than the printed page. But he developed an uncanny ability. He could skim over a handful of pages of a book to absorb the most complex concepts. He was then able to hold entire conversations about those topics, fooling people into believing that he was a total expert on, for example, Platonic philosophy. Eventually, Jimmy and Beverly broke off their relationship, and he grew tired of the Sunset Strip mob. In fact, he was sick of Hollywood and Los Angeles as a whole. Late in 1951, with a few possessions in his case, James Dean eschewed conformity and bravely moved to New York, looking for an edgier scene and a more intense life. On the East Coast, Dean resumed his routine of small bit parts on radio and TV. He even appeared on cheesy quiz shows where his function was merely to have pies thrown in his face. His new girlfriend was aspiring dancer Elizabeth Sheridan, known as Dizzy, the daughter of pianist Frank Sheridan. The two moved into cramped lodgings and were soon joined by William Bast. The trio took to hanging out with a circle of young radio, TV, and Broadway professionals, and Jimmy became friendly with producer Rogers Brackett. Brackett later said that their relationship was actually of a sexual nature to the benefit of both. Rogers, in fact, was happy to introduce Dean to the who's who of the New York theatrical scene. And it was thanks to him that Jimmy met Lem Ayres in the summer of 1952, a producer working on the staging of See the Jaguar, a new play by N. Richard Nash. Dean had cast his eyes on the role of a teenager locked for years in a smokehouse operated by an overprotective mother. But production did not progress, so he turned his attention to further honing his craft. It was during this period that James entered the legendary actor's studio. This is where acting coach Lee Strasberg, inspired by Stanislavski's teachings, had honed the method simply known as, well, the method. This is the school that would forge the talents of Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, Geraldine Page, Marilyn Monroe, and later Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. At the age of 21, Jimmy was the youngest member of the studio. His chops greatly impressed fellow students, visiting directors like Elia Kazan and the man himself, Mr. Strasberg. Although, apparently, the two never got on well. Strasberg made Dean the target of his frequent barbed critiques, pushing him to spill his metaphorical guts into his roles. Dean was not eager to let Strasberg dissect me like a rabbit in a laboratory. Eventually, Jimmy took to describing Strasberg's acting instructions as mostly hot air and hog shit. In August, Dean joined the Ayres family on a 10-boat cruise, not as a passenger, but as a crew member on their yacht. He had adopted Lem Ayres and wife as his New York surrogate parents, and took the occasion to drain them of all their nautical knowledge. Along the way, he carved a good, lasting impression on the producer. The boating trip was followed by a break in Fairmont, during which Jimmy introduced Bast and Dizzy to his Aunt Hortense and his Uncle Marcus. This was probably the only occasion in which William Bast observed James Dean to be completely at ease with himself and those surrounding him. Bast and Dizzy also got to meet Winton, Jimmy's dad, who joined them at the farm for some days. Dizzy observed how father and son were shy and respectful to each other, as if wary of breaking a fragile emotional balance. She found their relationship endearing, but in reality, they had grown too distant, too different to have a proper rapport. Winton did not hide the fact that he could not understand and accept Jimmy's lifestyle, nor his choice of becoming an actor. Mr. Dean would have hoped for a more solid profession for James. Little did he know that it was about to pick up. The holiday at the Quaker farm was, in fact, cut short by a call from New York. The Ayres had decided to cast James in See the Jaguar. After a successful run in provincial theaters, the play landed on Broadway in December 1952. The abrasive New York critics metaphorically ripped the script to shreds, spat on it, and then wiped their shoes. The play sucked, apparently, and they closed it after 5 nights. The only redeeming factor was the performance of a young, unknown actor, James Dean. New job proposals kept pouring in, the most interesting one being another theatre production, The Immortalist, based on the novel by Andre Gide. Here, James played the role of Bashir, an Algerian young man who seduces the male protagonist. The rehearsals, apparently, were no walk in the park. As Jimmy related to Bast, director Daniel Mann was openly hostile against him. As Jimmy saw directors as surrogate fathers, hostility on their part was especially demoralizing. But Jimmy may have done his part to drive the rest of the cast and crew totally nuts. During the rehearsals, he met, befriended, and seduced another aspiring actor, John Gilmore. In his memoirs, Gilmore recorded how Dean was uncommunicative with the cast, or how he read his lines flatly and slowly, mumbling through dialogue or improvising without warning. Most of the cast could not stand him and almost had him fired. The only colleague who stood up for him was Geraldine Page. It was no coincidence that Page was aware of Dean's difficulties with reading. In Dean's own explanation to Gilmore, before he could properly act a script, he needed plenty of time to read it, digest it, and memorize it. He had to swallow the script, take it into his stomach, and fart it out. Let me say this. Apparently on opening night, 8th of February 1954, James farted the right way because he impressed a Hollywood heavyweight, director Elia Kazan. According to sources, it was either thanks to Geraldine Page or Jimmy's agent Jane Deasy that Kazan realized that James Dean should be the lead for his next film, East of Eden, based on the novel by John Steinbeck. The plot revolves around Cal Trask, a young man with a fractured relationship with his strict father who sees him as a good-for-nothing and a troublemaker. In fact, Cal fit James like a glove. Kazan noticed it. Even if he did not like James on a personal level, he knew that he had cast a star in the making. Jimmy returned to Hollywood to start filming, and it was during this time that he met rising star Pierre Angeli. Born Anna Maria Pierangeli in Sardinia, the Italian actress had caught the eyes of Hollywood casting directors and had just recently moved to Tinseltown. Apparently, their relationship never went beyond a strong friendship and a total spiritual and cultural affinity. It was clear that the two were meant for each other and even loved each other deeply. Unfortunately, Pierre's mother stepped in. She was still very young and her mother managed all aspects of her career, including who she should be dating. Her mum objected that Dean was not Catholic and was worried that his reputation as something of an oddball could compromise Pierre's rise to success. Eventually, the Italian actress married entertainer Vic Damone. According to Bast, they say when Pierre married Vic Damone, Jimmy stood across from the church and cried. In the meantime, filming for East of Eden had wrapped and Warner Brothers had offered a new role to James Dean, his most iconic one, the character of conflicted teenager Jim Stark in Rebel Without a Cause by Nicholas Ray. The movie was one of the first big productions to deal with the disaffected youth of the post-World War II generation. It introduced tropes such as knife fights amongst teen gangs or lethal chickie runs with powerful racing cars. At a deeper level, it is an exploration of the troubled psyche of a young man and woman disappointed by parents and authorities who were either distant, overbearing, or just plain inadequate. Jimmy, the actor, and Jim, the character, shared a passion for speed. Dean had spent his first Hollywood paychecks on a brand new motorbike, and while he whizzed around LA, producers, insurers, and friends were dead worried that it'd break his neck. A friend of Kazan's thought that Jimmy's idol, Marlon Brando, might talk some sense into him. Jimmy had always pined for Brando's attention, a feeling that the older actor had always shrugged off. When the two met, Brando warned Dean to get off the bike, as an actor with half a face is no actor at all. And that seemed to do the trick. Jimmy sold the bike and bought a Porsche, satisfying his need for speed with sports cars. He took to road racing, winning 2 trophies in his first competitions. But according to Bast, he was not pursuing accolades, rather the excitement of taunting death. More precisely, he may have been pursuing that elusive sudden death leading to personal immortality, that sublime and macabre concept that he learned from Reverend Weird. Dean had little time to speed around the racetrack, though. After Rebel had wrapped, he was immediately cast as Jet Rink in George Stevens' sprawling Texan epic giant. Albeit important, the role was not a lead one, but it did not matter to Dean, as he got to star alongside Hollywood royalty like Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor. Director Stevens had a hard time working with Dean, who frequently erupted in fits of rage or long sulky spells, but the veteran filmmaker decided to make the most of it, asking the cinematographer to keep cameras rolling in between takes to capture those unique moments. Co-star Liz Taylor also learned to cope with Dean's mood swings, and the two became good pals. But the closest friendship was the one that Dean forged with set photographer Sandy Roth and his wife, Belua. The trio had a common interest in photography, and eventually the actor came to adopt the couple as his newest surrogate parents. Yes, the same pattern repeating itself again. Dean spent much time at their home, engaging in endless discussions about films and art, raiding their fridge, and playing with Lewis, the couple's Siamese cat. Liz Taylor took notice and decided to give a present to James, a Siamese kitten. For the first time, Dean had to look after another being, which he decided to name after his uncle Marcus. The kitten had a positive influence on Dean's life. It gave him a sense of responsibility and normalized his habits. As Bast noted, Jimmy even took to returning home earlier at night. And yet, a few weeks later, he confessed to the Roths that he had given the kitten away. He was concerned that his professional commitments would not allow him to properly look after Marcus. In fact, James had just been cast as the lead in Somebody Up There Likes Me, the real-life story of boxer Rocky Graziano. And besides that, he realized that he led such a strange and unpredictable life that some night he might not return home again. He wondered, then what would happen to Marcus? Maybe this was a eerie premonition of his sudden death. It wasn't the only one around that time. On the 22nd of September 1955, James Dean had a chance encounter with Alec Guinness in LA. The British actor took a look at his new Porsche 550 Spider and said, "You'll be dead if you get into that car." Some days later, on the 30th, Dean and his mechanic, Rolf Wetherich, were driving the Porsche to a race in Salinas, California. At 3:30 p.m., they were given a speeding ticket. Later, while driving along Route 466, Dean's Porsche got into an accident with another car driven by student Donald Turnipseed. The 550 Spider was devastated from the impact. Turnipseed and Wetherich were severely injured, but survived. James Dean, driving at the moment of impact, was killed almost immediately. He was 24. James Dean's life had burned bright, blazed fast, and disintegrated far too soon. But his fate would be spared oblivion. Only one of his movies was released during his lifetime, East of Eden. Rebel Without a Cause premiered in 1955 and Giant in 1956. Both films were popular and critical successes, and audiences simply could not ignore Dean's peculiar, intense, heartbreaking, yet realistic acting style. A legend was born, ironically, after his death. At the 1956 and 1957 Oscars, James Dean was nominated for his performances in East of Eden and Giant, respectively. He didn't win the awards ultimately, but to this day, Dean is the only actor to receive 2 posthumous Oscar nominations. Besides the self-destructive tendencies, besides his philosophizing about sudden death followed by immortality, James Dean was serious about his craft and development as a professional actor. Had he lived, he would have been set to achieve legendary status. Perhaps his career would have followed a trajectory similar to that of Paul Newman, the actor who inherited his role in the Rocky Graziano biopic. Or more likely, he would have trailed the progress of his idol Marlon Brando, another method illuminous, manly yet vulnerable, who became both a darling of the Academy and a Hollywood maverick. But besides all the what-ifs, the 3 movies left by James Dean influenced entire generations of actors and filmmakers and left an enduring legacy on American popular culture. Perhaps Larry Cart of the Chicago Tribune summarized it best on the 30th anniversary of Dean's death. When all is said, what James Dean managed to do was enough. So I really hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.